Welcome to the Nonfiction Writers, podcasting in a great way. I'm Ryan Aber, joined by Jason Kersey. Jason, it's been a while since we've been around to talk OU football, but a lot going on. First of all, the biggest news of the day, Dorial Green Beckham, the five-star recruit who chose Missouri a couple years ago, there's talk about him possibly winding up at Oklahoma. What are the chances that this really happens?
I think the chances of this actually happening are really, really low. I know that there's interest, mutual interest there, and that sort of makes sense because he's a great player and extremely talented, and it would make sense that there would be some interest. But I think at the end of the day, Dorial Green Beckham is not going to want to sit out next year, which I think he would almost certainly have to do unless there's something we don't know. And I think that the OU coaches, frankly, are smarter than that. I mean, I just don't think there's any reason why he would be worth this risk, given his history and the things that got him kicked off the Missouri team, especially in light of the things that have gone on with OU in terms of Trey McTwire, Josh Jarbo, and most recently Frank Shannon.
Yeah, to me, I can't see why they would take the risk to bring in a player like this who's going to have to sit out a year, who doesn't want to sit out a year. And I, like you, don't see any way the NCAA would give him an immediate waiver. There seems to be no real reason. He apparently got kicked off the team did get kicked off the Missouri team after a couple of arrests for marijuana, being accused of, I believe, pushing a girl down the stairs in Missouri, and apparently some other stuff that they haven't made public. And to me, I just can't see how you would get him eligible immediately. And some of the talk has been that he wants to play this year in college somewhere and then go into the NFL. And if he wants to play, he's going to have to play at the 1AA or below level.
Yeah, and the talk was Eastern Illinois, and then that sort of went away. And then the talk was, well, he might just go sit out this year completely and then go to the NFL next year. And I mean, I just think this kid is a mess right now, and I don't think OU would really want any part of that. And you know, OU's got such a good reputation when it comes to law and order sort of stuff. I mean, Bob Stoops is a really strict guy when it comes to that. He doesn't really put up with stuff, and it just would not seem to make any sense that he would take this risk, especially when, you know, yeah, they need wide receivers, experienced ones. I think that's definitely they definitely do need receivers, but at the same time, they have guys that are young, really, really inexperienced, but young and talented, and I just don't think there's any reason to do this.
Especially like what you mentioned with the Frank Shannon deal hanging over their heads. I know that he's been back with the team, gone through some of the workouts recently. He was a part of their some of their camps that they did earlier this month. But with that whole situation hanging over their head, I don't think they can add another possible distraction.
Well, especially when you know, in a matter of months, you have 2 allegations of violence against women on your team. I mean, that's just a stain on OU's really good reputation that I don't think they want or need.
Absolutely. And last time we talked to Josh McQuistion of Soonerscoop.com and about OU's recruiting lag since their Sugar Bowl push. That's really turned around here in the last month.
Yeah, they're doing a lot better on the recruiting trail. Most notably, I think, is Rodney Anderson, the running back from Katy, Texas. Just another example of Cale Gundy really doing a terrific job. I mean, every year it seems they land a pretty significant running back or two, and that's to Cale Gundy's credit. So that to me was the big one. But then they've also picked up some offensive linemen. I think they're up to 7 commitments in the 2015 class, and you know, it sounds to me like there might be more on the way soon. So,
yeah, absolutely. I think you mentioned Cale Gundy. It seems like he's maybe the most underrated recruiter on this staff with what he's able to do. I know a lot of people talk about, especially Jay Norvell, and the success that he's been able to have bringing wide receivers in. But it doesn't seem like we talk about Cale. Maybe that's just because he's not nearly as visible to the public as Jay Norvell and Josh Heupel and those guys. But clearly, he's been extremely successful bringing in big-time running backs.
Every year. I mean, going back to Adrian Peterson, DeMarco Murray, those guys, and then you just look at the last several. I mean, right now you have Rodney Anderson. Last year's class, obviously Joe Mixon and Samaje Perine. Before that, Keith Ford, Alex Ross, Britton Clay, and Roy Finch. It's just every year there's a running back that they get a 4 or 5 star guy. So it's and Damian Williams was a 3-star guy from junior college, but he turned out to be a really good player too. So that's just something that they're really that Cale Gundy's really excelled at, and obviously it's worked out.
Absolutely, and OU has gone jumping up the charts as far as national recruiting rankings and things like that over the last month. What do they have to do to continue this momentum, you think, or is it just going to naturally go as this thing has started with the camps that they've had and other things that they've been able to capitalize on recently?
Well, I thought that the Sugar Bowl was going to give them momentum, and I think it did at first, and that seemed to wane a little bit, but I think that combined with the success that they had at the end of last year, the addition of Bedenbaugh, Montgomery, and Boulware to the staff, and like you said, the camps and things like that, and just the national perception of OU football. The Sugar Bowl's part of it, but then also just the excitement of next year. The possibilities there, I think, are helpful as well. And I even saw yesterday on Twitter that Josh Waraboko tweeted that he needed to get back down to Norman. So obviously he was committed, a big time guy that was committed, then decommitted. But I don't know that they're out of the running for him either.
Yeah, I don't either. I think I haven't talked to Josh in a while, but when I did talk to him, it seemed like he was a different kind of kid, and I say that in a completely positive way. I think the way he thought about the recruiting process and everything, I think, was a little bit unique. And obviously, he wants to play with his brother. He wants to take the recruiting trips and things like that, and didn't want those to distract from being an OU commit, and I think that's why he decided to decommit. So I think most times when a kid decommits, even though generally they say, oh, this school's still in the running, it winds up not being like that. I don't think that's the case with Josh Waraboko.
No, I don't think that that's the case at all. So I think he's definitely still going to consider OU, and OU's still in pretty good shape when it comes to him.
Absolutely. And another big topic in college football or in OU football this week, it's been 25 years since Barry Switzer resigned as the coach of OU. I believe that anniversary is on Friday. What is his lasting impact on Oklahoma football?
Oh, well, I don't think we have enough time to talk about that. I mean, he won 3 national championships. He's a legend in college football. One of, 3 coaches now after Pete Carroll that's won a Super Bowl and a collegiate national championship. And he's just a Norman staple. I mean, people feel like they know him around Norman. I think that's the thing that I find the most remarkable about Barry Switzer is that he can go anywhere in Norman, and he's got no problem stopping and talking to anybody. People feel like he's their friend, and I think that's pretty remarkable. And I think that obviously the way his tenure ended at OU was really sad and unfortunate, and I don't think he deserved to go out like that. Obviously, there were mistakes that he made that created that situation, but given his impact on the community as a whole, I don't think that he really deserved that. So it is interesting that it's now been 25 years.
It's amazing that it's been 25 years for me, having grown up in Oklahoma City and watched a lot of those teams right when I was starting to get into football. But it's amazing that 25 years after he coached his last game in Norman, and after the way that his career ended there, that he's still the face of this program.
Yeah, he in many ways he is, and Bob's. It's funny how different Bob Stoops and Barry Switzer really are. I mean, they're both legendary OU coaches. They're both going to be remembered fondly by Sooner fans for forever. But they're just so drastically different. Barry Switzer was, like I said, he's just Mr. Personality. Everybody enjoys being around him. He's never met a stranger. Well, Bob, is not a bad guy, but he's not like that when it comes to the public. He's not nearly as warm and friendly with people, and that's just the way he is. And with the media and things like that. So that's the thing that I think is so funny is these two guys and their friends. They pal around together. They do all those sorts of things, but they're just
they've gone to different things around the country and things like that. But they on the surface they're so different.
Right.
And Jason, it's been a while since we've talked. You went off and got married recently, but a lot was going on during that time. The NCAA, a lot of talk there with the Division IV thing. Talked about moving signing day or what to do with that. One coach, a guy we're familiar with, Bo Pelini, even say they should do away with signing day, period. First of all, with the Division IV, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that that is going to eventually come to fruition, or is it going to be some other kind of compromise with the power conferences?
I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting thought. Giving the 5 power conferences more autonomy, I think, is something that's really interesting. I think that's a good way to deal with the money issue, because those 5 conferences obviously make more money than anybody else. It's those 5 conferences that have the players that feel like they're being slighted because of all the television money, and so if you give them a little bit more independence to set their own rules and maybe provide more benefits because they can, then you're not putting everybody else at such a disadvantage. So I think that's probably the way that they'll wind up going. I think that's the way that they probably should wind up going. And then, this Ed O'Bannon case is ongoing. It's in trial. It's really been fascinating to follow. I have no idea how it's going to turn out, but I think the entire landscape of college athletics is about to change.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any denying that there's going to be big changes coming. I think that the Division IV thing, whether it's called Division IV, or if there's some other version of autonomy, certainly those power conferences are going to have to do things differently than the rest of college athletics if we want to keep the college athletics model as it stands in any form right now. And then the Ed O'Bannon stuff is going to be really interesting to follow to see how that winds up, because it seems like some of the arguments that the NCAA is making are pretty tough to back up. When you talk about, I think yesterday they said, we're talking on Thursday, so on Wednesday they said that there were no new revenue streams except for, they're adding the SEC network, and clearly that's going to be a big new revenue stream for that conference, and other conferences are going in that direction or have gone in that direction as well. And certainly there's things that are being done all around college football that make a lot more people a lot more money, and the athletes haven't been a part of that. And I think that in some level that's going to change before long.
It has to change. I mean, I just don't think there's any way around it. I mean, this whole debate about whether these athletes are employees or not is the only reason that you would think that they're not employees is just because we've never thought of it that way. I mean, if you just, if you don't let your, the way we've thought about college sports for years and years and years cloud your judgment, of course they're employees. I mean, it's obvious they're more of university employees than the kid working in the library is, the kid working part-time in the student union at the Chick-fil-A is, but we don't think of them that way because they're student athletes. It's ridiculous, really. I mean, I don't think that they should be paid like professional athletes, but I also think that we need to stop pretending like they're not employees, because they clearly are.
Yeah, I think that has sort of garnered the NCAA less sympathy, because they take this hard line on, they're student athletes, they're students first, they go to school, they're just like every other student. I think holding up that pretense to me is what has held up the NCAA from making these reforms on their own instead of probably having them forced upon them from outside.
Yeah, I mean, their whole system is just so arbitrary, and they. I know you're a South Park fan like I am, and I think you remember the episode where they mock the NCAA. Cartman says, "I don't make the rules. I just think them up and write them down." So
exactly, and tying back into OU football, to me, the most absurd part of this whole NCAA thing we've seen, with the exception of possibly the Kansas State women's basketball player recently, where they wouldn't let her go virtually anywhere, is the Baker Mayfield deal. This is a kid who walked on at Texas Tech, didn't have a scholarship, wasn't guaranteed a scholarship in the future when he decided to leave Texas Tech, goes to OU, and not only does he have to sit out this year, he loses a year of eligibility as a non-scholarship player at OU.
I mean, that's just, there's no reason for it. It's nonsense that this kid who was never on scholarship can't even redshirt this year. And, I know some people want to question whether or not it was a good idea for him to come to OU.
Well, certainly you can question that, given all the facts. But just the thought that if he comes here, that he has to sit out a year and lose a season of eligibility while not being on scholarship at either school, that is, to me, completely ridiculous.
Oh yeah, it is, and that's my point. I mean, it's absurd, and it's things like that that has totally turned public opinion against the NCAA. I mean, that's the reason why there's this momentum. I mean, in the 80s, whenever they opened up the schools and conferences to negotiate their own television contracts and everybody started getting rich off of college sports, if at some point along the way someone had just had the foresight to think, we probably need to do something about these athletes, whether it's and I know the argument is, well, that money's being spent on new dorms and new training tables and new facilities and all those things, but somewhere along the line, it baffles me that nobody thought, well, maybe we should provide full cost of attendance scholarships, or maybe we should give them a little stipend, or maybe, but no one ever thought to do that. And so while the coaches and the athletic directors and the universities have become wealthy off of this endeavor and this TV money, the very people that are doing it remain exactly the same as they did before, and that's outrageous, and that needs to change.
Absolutely, and another, I know we're mainly talking about football in this podcast, but another bit of absurdity is the baseball scholarship breakdown. I believe they get 11.7 as a scholarship number divided amongst their whole team, and a lot of the baseball coaches that I talked to during Big 12 tournament, during NCAA regionals, harp on that as something that needs to change, especially when you look at the College World Series that's going on now, the attendance, the ratings, and everything like that event's bringing in.
Yeah, that's definitely true. But I also think that baseball and sports that are non-revenue sports are going to be the thing that really is going to be the most difficult to figure out, because especially with Title IX and all those things. I mean, if you start giving a football player a stipend, do you have to give a women's basketball player a stipend too? Do you have to? What about walk-ons? What about do you give Trevor Knight the same stipend that you give I don't know, the third string right guard,
Absolutely.
And do you give him the same that you give the women's basketball team that loses money every year, or the volleyball team, or whatever?
And also, to me, it's different conferences are going to be interesting, because you mentioned baseball is a non-revenue sport, and I think there's no doubt that within the Big 12 and pretty well every other conference it is, except for when you go to the SEC and they're selling out stadiums, on all 3 weekend nights. when you look at Arkansas, LSU, places like that. Are they going to have to do something different for conferences when the reality in those places is so much different?
And what happens if they decide in the SEC that they are going to give a stipend to baseball players, but the Big 12 doesn't want to do that? Well, then does that put all the recruiting advantages towards the SEC? I mean, these are things that people that are a lot smarter than you and I are going to have to figure out, but these are all questions I have.
But yeah, you look at things that you can see that might make sense on paper, but the unintended consequences of them are certainly going to ripple far and wide. All right, Jason, well, that's all the time we have today. Thanks. Welcome back. That is the Nonfiction Writers, podcasting in a great way. For Jason Kersey, I'm Ryan Aber. Join us next week.